Hello everybody, this is a new video on positional chess, and this game I'm about to show you was played in 1906 between Rubinstein and Perlis. Rubinstein was white and the game started d4, d5, and bishop f4 was played. This has now become known as the London system, when white just tries to take control of the e5 square, usually with a knight, and develop the bishop outside of the pawn chain, which will go f2, e3, d4. And sometimes pawn c2 to c3 is played, creating a pawn triangle from b2 to d4 to f2. So not the usual pawn c4 on move 2. Black plays e6, and white now plays e3. So very sort of solid, and it has a good positional basis in that you want to make your pawn structure very very solid and with absolutely no weaknesses. So black plays knight f6. And Rubinstein here plays knight f3, so again controlling the e5 square with now a knight, bishop, and the d4 pawn. Bishop d6 was now played, and here what I would do if I was white, which Rubinstein did not do, I would think that black wants to play pawn c5 or c6, and his pawn chain on f7, e6, d5 is all about controlling the light squares. So if I remove his bishop on d6, he won't now have a piece to take control of lots of the dark squares, leaving him with holes in his position. Whereas my bishop is a so-called bad bishop, which is on the same color as all my pawns, so it's just controlling the squares the pawns control, but a little worse. So I would just exchange bishops here. But Rubinstein didn't want to exchange so early. Perhaps he didn't want the queen to be developed with tempo. So he played bishop g3, and queen e7 was played. And queen e7 is not a move I would have played here. I would probably have just played c5 or possibly c6, maybe even just castle. But this may be a little bit premature to ask you this now, but can you see what idea black might have here by playing queen e7? Well, think about that over the next couple of moves. Rubinstein here played knight b d2. So often what you want to do is to take control of e5. You put the knight on f3 to e5, and then you use your other knight to protect the knight. So if the first one is taken, your second knight can jump straight back in with the recapture. And a knight on e5 or d5, or for black, e4 or d4, may not create immediate threats, but it's just very annoying and it puts a lot of pressure and can often cramp your opponent's position. So that's quite a thematic positional idea to put your knights into the centre just inside your opponent's half. So here knight bd7 was played, and there are a few good natural moves that white has. A move that I might have played, which is why I'm not Rubinstein, is I might just have played bishop d3. And now we're about to see the point of queen e7. What would black play here to equalize in this position? Well, with his last two moves, he's been preparing the pawn break, pawn advance, e5, and now his bishop on c8 can potentially move to g4 or e6, so the bishops become more mobile, or will be in the next few moves. This also does attack the sort of the head of White's pawn formation, pawn chain on d4. If left unchecked, the pawn could advance to e4. Similar to a knight, it would leave a very cramping influence in the long term for White's pieces. And the immediate threat would be e4, forking the bishop and knight as well. So I think the best move for White here would just be to take. Black would then recapture, and possibly here both sides could castle, and White's got not a bad game, but White, I would not say White was better or really had many prospects in this position. I think Black's equalised fairly comfortably here. So that was not played. Bishop d3 wasn't played. Instead, knight e5 was played. So again, the idea to cramp Black's pieces and stop the pawn break. So sometimes in chess, there's a positional idea of preventing what your opponent is planning to do, and that can often lead them to make mistakes. So here, Black responds with knight to e4, and I'm not sure I like this move so much because in terms of pawn structure, I feel like White is getting a better pawn structure than Black in this position. White can simply take, Black will recapture, and now I feel that after queen d2, Black's pieces are still not very active, and if Black takes the knight, as he did in the game, White can simply recapture with the pawn. And here you may be saying, well, you know, why is this pawn structure better for White? I mean, the pawns are literally identical in terms of the position. But look at the placement of Black's pieces. The pawn on e4 for Black is going to become very weak very quickly. It's difficult to defend. But White's pawn on e5 is already defended by the bishop, and I think that's relatively easy to defend actually with White's two bishops. White could just remove the knight on d7 if I say bishop b5 and then bishop takes, and yes, Black can't really defend the e4 pawn, but we'll see how it turns out. Knight b6 was played, and now this is a brilliant move, which I would not have seen at all. I'd have played something different. Can you think of how White tried to change the position favourably, perhaps to better attack the e4 pawn? Well, Black's plan, remember how I said about you want to prevent your opponent's plans a lot of the time? Black's plan is to play bishop to d7 and then bishop c6, and here he will be protecting the pawn on e4, and it will be practically impossible to win the pawn. So White prevents that plan with bishop b5 check. So here, if pawn c6 is played, then it's going to be very hard for the bishop to escape the pawn structure. Bishop on c8 will be very underused, very useless. And also, the d6 square might be very useful because that square is not going to be defended/attacked by any of black's pawns. So you could play queen d6 in a few moves, and later on maybe castle queenside, bolster the queen with a rook, and use that square to sort of pivot around and maybe put sort of use that to perhaps double or triple on the d-file. And if the queen, let's say, takes white's queen, white can capture with the pawn, and he'll have a very strong passed pawn on d6, which would be, I think, a practically winning endgame sort of trump card feature of the position. So c6 isn't very good. King f7, f8 would be terrible, with the king stuck in the center. So black plays bishop d7, and white takes. Black takes. So now there isn't a bishop to defend e4, and before attacking it, oh, actually no, sorry, white does attack it first with queen d4. So it's hard to know how to defend this. Black has to try with f5, and here white can undouble his pawns by taking on f6. And again, black can only really defend it with knight takes f6. So black now has doubled isolated pawns, which is something I absolutely hate having in my games, and I love my opponents to have, so I would be very happy as white here. Also, the bishop on g3 is now aiming at c7, and the position has become quite open with this exchange in the center. So the bishop may prove to be stronger than the knight over the course of the rest of the game. So at this point, white plays queen a4 check. Again, very, very strong as a move. c6, again, the same problems occur. White could castle queenside and use d6 as a place to put some of his pieces to infiltrate and put pressure on black. Queen d7 would probably not be very, very good as a move. This particular point I'm about to make is based on Emanuel Lasker's notes, where he pointed out that after queen takes queen and black recaptures, white can simply castle queenside and has the rather simple idea of rook d4 attacking the pawn on e4. And again, in the long term, maybe not immediately, but black is going to have real trouble defending the pawn on e4 and the doubled isolated pawns in general. So, just as an example, here I feel that white has a very good position, and white could probably just swap everything off if he wanted to and just win in the king and pawn endgame because of the weakness of the pawn structure, which can be very, very telling all the way up to the end of the game. So that is what could possibly have happened if queen d7 was played in this position, but Rubinstein's opponent Perlis did not play queen d7. Instead, he played king f7, connecting the rooks, and white now castled. So again, the idea is just to put pressure on black's position. The king is slightly out of place, it's a little bit weak. Doubled isolated pawns aren't very good. c7 is now a target as well for the bishop, and white can simply try and double on the d-file. So what black did here was play a6, which does make some sense because I think the idea was to play rook d8, but you couldn't immediately because white could take, assuming black had played rook h to d8, white could take, and then if the rook recaptured, a7 would be unguarded, and if the queen captured, then white could gain a tempo with rook to d1, rook on h1 coming to d1, and black would need to move the queen again, and then white's pieces would be very well coordinated, and black's rook would still be stuck on a8. So black's next move would probably be rook to d8, either rook to d8. Rubinstein played bishop h4 though. So here he's threatening bishop takes queen, sorry, bishop takes, not bishop takes queen, bishop takes knight, queen recaptures, and then e4 is unguarded and white can simply win a pawn. So queen e8 was played. White doesn't want to trade of queens just yet. His queen looks more active than black's queen. So it's just a question of which piece is better. The white queen is far more mobile, so the quality of the piece is better than black's quality of their piece. So queen c4 was played, just again targeting the pawn on e4 and the pawn on c7, creating multiple threats. So knight d5 was played, and you may think queen c6 would be an interesting move because it would protect the pawn on e4. But have a look at the position after white plays queen takes queen, b takes queen, c6, and look at the pawn structure. I mean, black has two sets of double isolated pawns, an isolated pawn on a6, and okay, alright, his pawns on g7 and h7 are quite nice. And white's pawn structure is practically perfect. They're all side by side, apart from the pawn on e3, which is blockading the pawns on e4 and e6. And white could even swap minor pieces. And if black takes with the pawn, white has rook d7 check, winning the pawn on c7. And if king takes bishop, rook d4 or rook d7, and white can double rooks. So white would be, I think, completely winning here, even though material is currently even. This endgame looks very, very strong. So that is why queen c6 was not played, and instead knight d5 was played. Black's trying to improve the quality of his pieces and gain compensation for the pawn. So queen takes e4, may as well win the pawn that we've worked so hard for. Queen c6, queen f3 check, and I'm not sure what I'd have done here, to be honest. I mean, king g6 does look very dangerous, marching your king up the board. And king e8 is probably what I would have played, but having your king in the center is still quite it's just not good. It's quite risky to have your king right in the middle of the board. So I can understand king g8 as was played, but the trouble is the rook on h8 is now just a bystander. It's an observer. It's not doing anything. So in this position, white played e4. Rubinstein's trying to gain some space now and make the knight on d5 move, because that knight on d5 is very well positioned. So Perlis does a cheeky mate threat with knight b4. So the game could have ended very embarrassingly if, say, rook d4, then queen takes c2 mate would have been embarrassing. But instead, queen b3. So attacking the knight, putting pressure on the pawn on e6, and just having a queen on a good square, and also aiming at the king on g8 as well. So here, black actually resigned because I think he was just a bit He was very aware that he was just being completely outplayed, and although he's only a pawn down, so I would not have resigned in this position, when you see kind of how the position could transpose over the next few moves, it's not very pretty, because again, the rook on h8 can't move, so black is effectively a rook down temporarily. So white could simply double on the d file, and then play rook d8 check and win the rook, for example. Black's king is never going to be safe, and white's king is very, very safe. So all of white's pieces are better than black's pieces, as well as being pawn up. And you may say to me, well, okay, all right, what about queen takes e4? I'm now equal on material. Okay, I'm not very well placed in terms of where my pieces are, but is that really going to be so devastating? If I could just have a few moves to consolidate, maybe play knight d5, then h6, then king h7, I've connected the rooks, is it really so bad? And my answer here is rook d4. Yeah, so so here I'm defending the bishop, which was under attack. I'm attacking the knight on b4. That's going to go. And I did look. I thought I saw this move when I looked through the game, and I turned on my engine to see if I was right and this is a good move, because I'd looked at things like queen f5 or other moves, or queen takes g2, and I thought I saw checkmates and things for white, but I wanted to be sure. And it's quite telling that the computer says the best move here is queen takes c2 check, just being a knight down, and it's about I think +3 or +4 on the computer evaluation. Just to show you, if queen takes rook, there is a checkmate here. Can you see the mate? Yes, queen takes e6 check, king f8 only move, bishop e7 check, king e8, and here there is more than one mate, but my favourite is bishop f6 check, king f8, queen e7 check, king back to g8, entombing the rook, and finally queen takes g7 mate. So I hope you enjoyed this game. I thought this was a rather brilliant masterpiece by Rubinstein. And any comments, questions, put them attached to this video. Anyway, bye.